There we go. Is it on now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this chapter is chapter 39. It's a one-day chapter. And what I want you to know from this chapter is basically how your muscles work. That's the most important thing. Oh, here we go. What page? Does anybody have a page number?
736.
736. So, the first part of this chapter talks about different organisms and their different types of skeletons. Now, the simplest organisms have what we call a hydrostatic skeleton. That means there's a bunch of water inside the body of the organism. And the water is under high pressure, so it kind of pushes outward on their bodies and makes them kind of bulge outward. And we call that a hydrostatic skeleton. Water on the inside. And that's the simplest type of skeleton. A little, yeah.
So there's no actual
There's no bones, it's just water pressure.
Oh.
Keeping the body rigid.
So you said the water pressure pushes out?
Yeah, it's like if you turned on a hose real high, but the end of the hose was blocked off, the hose would just kind of bulge outward, right? That's a hydrostatic skeleton. Held rigid by water pressure. You like that kind of skeleton?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's another type of skeleton that arthropods have. It's called an exoskeleton. Exoskeleton is hard, made of a hard substance called chitin, also known as chitin. C-H-I-T-I-N. And it protects the body of the organism. Now, that's very helpful to an insect. It's hard to damage an insect. You can flick a cockroach and it will slam against the wall and it'll go down and then it'll just run off because it's not damaged because it's a tough exoskeleton. What's the disadvantage to having an exoskeleton?
If it breaks your...
Well, if it breaks, you're in trouble. Okay.
Heavy.
You could say that of any kind of skeleton.
Not very flexible.
It is heavy. You won't find any arthropod that's very big because once you start getting a certain size, the exoskeleton becomes real heavy. And it's hard to move around. You can imagine if you had a suit of armor on the outside, that'd be heavy, right? And it keeps these organisms from growing too big. The biggest bugs are, about the size of your hand, which is pretty big, but it's not anything compared to an elephant.
What about like a turtle? Do they have an exoskeleton?
Not really, no. They have an endoskeleton like we do, but part of their endoskeleton sticks out their back, so that's really an endoskeleton. Yeah?
They, every so often they have to molt in order to grow.
Very good. You can't grow with an exoskeleton very easily. And so what you have to do, you have to shed your exoskeleton, crawl out of it, and grow a new one. And when you grow the new one, you got to leave it plenty of room so you can grow into it. And so what these animals will do is they'll crawl out of their exoskeleton. Often they'll puff themselves up, maybe by drinking water or something like that, and they'll get bigger. And then they'll make a new exoskeleton. The cells of their body secrete the exoskeleton, and the exoskeleton hardens. And then they'll pee out all the water, and then they'll have plenty of room that they can grow into their exoskeleton. We call that whole process molting. And most of these arthropods will molt many, many times before they reach their adult size. You might have some insects have 20 molts before they get to their adult size. Yes?
How long does it take to grow a new one?
I think it varies with the organism, but just a few days. And they'll usually hide during those days. So that's an exoskeleton. Now, we have an endoskeleton like this frog, with the bones on the inside and muscle and tissue on the outside. What's the disadvantage of having the skeleton on the inside?
Not protected like you will.
Not protected, easily damaged. So we've evolved a sophisticated means of repair where we can fix any damage pretty quickly. And that's kind of our way around it, but we're still damaged pretty often and pretty easily, and we sometimes die from the damage, and that's one of the drawbacks of an endoskeleton. But one of the advantages of the endoskeleton, it's a lot lighter, so we can grow a lot bigger. And in nature, big organisms do pretty well. And so we do pretty well. Alright? So those are the different types of skeletons. They go into the structure of bone. One thing that's important about your bones is your bones make your blood. I don't know if you knew that. The blood cells are made inside the bones. In the middle of the bones is stuff called bone marrow. And inside the bone marrow, new blood cells are made. The bones are also a good storage place for calcium and phosphorus. Lots of different ions stored in the bones. And the muscles are connected to the bones. Oh, there's all the bones. Do you know all the names of all the bones? We learned that in anatomy. If you take an anatomy class, you got to learn all the bones. We won't worry about it in this class. There's all the bones of the skull. And we go through learning all these various bones.
How do things without bones make blood?
They make it in the liver. That's a good question. Their livers make the blood. Yeah. When you're a baby in your mother's womb, you don't have any bones. It's all cartilage, and the blood is made by your liver. Now, here are all the muscles, and again, if you take an anatomy class, you learn all these muscles. We aren't going to worry about it in here. But what the muscles do is the muscles attach to bones. And the muscles can contract or shorten in length. Every muscle you have can contract. And so I'm going to just use this biceps muscle as an example. That's the big muscle of your upper arm. In y'all, it's normal size, and me, it's huge. But what happens is that biceps muscle, it sits right here on top of this bone right here. This is called the humerus bone. And the biceps muscle can shorten in length. One edge of the biceps muscle is attached up here to the shoulder blade, the scapula, and the other edge of the biceps muscle is attached down here to this bone, which is called the radius. And it sits right here, and if it shortens, well, the arm's going to come up. And that's how bones work. That's how muscles work. Each of them is attached to a bone. Each end of the muscle is attached to the bone, and they can shorten on their own and cause the movement of the muscle. Then, if you want to move your arm down, you have another muscle on the other side of this bone. It's called the triceps, and it sits right here. And part of it is attached to your shoulder, and the other end is attached to your elbow right here. And if it shortens, it pulls the arm back down. So you can shorten this to pull the arm up, and you can shorten that to pull the arm back down. That's all your muscles, they shorten, they contract. And I'm going to show you how they shorten here. You want to see video footage? So there's that muscle. See, when it contracts, the arm comes up, and then the triceps contracts and the arm goes down. So we call those two muscles antagonistic pairs. Have you ever heard of the word antagonism? Mm-hmm. That means they're working against one another. All muscles come in antagonistic pairs. There's a muscle that moves your arms out. There's a muscle that moves your arms back. There's a muscle that does your arm that way. There's a muscle that does your arm that way. Every movement has an opposite movement and an opposite muscle. What do you think about that? So if you take a muscle and you want to see how it looks, you cut into the muscle. This is her leg muscle here. And you see the muscle has bundles of muscle, what we call muscle fibers. There's the muscle, the quadriceps muscle here. And you pull a muscle fiber out of there. That's a muscle fiber. Or that's actually a bunch of muscle fibers. And inside that is a single muscle fiber. This is a muscle cell. Muscle cells are really long. You're used to a cell having a nucleus, right? Muscle cells are real long, and they might have 1,000 nuclei per cell. Because they're real long, they run the entire length of the muscle. They're real long and stringy, so we call them muscle fibers. A muscle cell is real long and stringy, and it's called a muscle fiber. And each cell runs the entire length of your muscle.
So there's nothing to. So a muscle fiber and a muscle cell are the
Same thing, yeah. Same thing. So let's take a look at how a muscle can contract. Oh, I don't know, that was a Botox injection. And it's best taught with this video. I'm going to turn the volume down and I'm going to do all the talking here. So this is a muscle fiber. What they've done is they've cut into it. And right here you have a nerve coming up. Did we already learn about nerves in here? Mm-hmm. We just did, right? So you should know how a nerve signal works. So what is this red nerve signal that's coming in? What do we call those nerve signals? They have a name. Action potentials. And so what happens is these action potentials come up, and this muscle cell here is going to react to the action potential. Let me back it up a bit. So, what happens? There are when the action potential reaches the end of the axon, some neurotransmitters are released. Remember that from last chapter? Acetylcholine is the name of the neurotransmitter that causes muscles to react. And when the acetylcholine chemical spills out onto the muscle cell, electrical impulses are moved along inside the muscle cell. And this is shown by these red lines here. See these red lines here? That's the electrical action potential being carried inside the muscle cell. And they go down special tubes called transverse tubules. So here's the action potential moving along this transverse tubule. Now the blue area here, it's called sarcoplasmic reticulum. Do you remember endoplasmic reticulum? We studied it in cells. Y'all remember endoplasmic reticulum? Mm-hmm. Well, this blue area here, that's called sarcoplasmic reticulum. And it's basically a membrane that holds a bunch of calcium. Calcium is very important to the contraction of a muscle. And what you're going to see as this electrical impulse moves down these T tubules, you're going to see a bunch of calcium coming out of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Let me back it up some. Here comes the electrical impulse. Wait, let's back it up some more. Here comes the electrical impulse, and now it's moving down these T tubules, transverse tubules. And the blue area is called sarcoplasmic reticulum. And calcium is going to be released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The little yellow balls that you see, that's calcium ions. And calcium ions are released to the muscles, inside the muscle. Now inside the muscle you have two types of proteins. The blue one on the top is called actin, and the red one on the bottom is called myosin. And what it is, the actin and the myosin are protein fibers. They're long, thin protein fibers. And they overlap with one another, kind of like I'm overlapping my fingers right now. Actin and myosin overlapping with one another. And they're showing one of the areas of overlap right here. And what's going to happen is the actin and myosin are going to move past one another and slide like that. And that makes the muscle shorten. And I'm going to show you how that works. This is actin, this is myosin, and this thing right here that looks like a paddle is called a myosin cross bridge. And what we're seeing here, this is the calcium that was released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And the calcium is going to be caught by a protein on the surface of the actin. Let me back this up again. Here comes the signal. Here comes the signal down the T-tubules. The calcium is being released. Calcium is being released. The calcium sinks down into the muscle fiber. And the calcium is captured by a special molecule right here. It's called troponin. The troponin is a protein that captures the calcium. And when this troponin captures the calcium, you notice there's this green molecule right here inside the muscle cell. It's called tropomyosin. There they have it labeled for you. And the tropomyosin is a rope-like protein. And what's happening is the tropomyosin protein here is covering up little binding sites. And that tropomyosin protein is going to move. Whoop. And so when the calcium is captured by the troponin molecule, the tropomyosin protein moves. And it exposes these little things that look like birds' beaks, or Pac-Man. Have y'all ever played the game Pac-Man? Doesn't that look like a little Pac-Man? Or a little bird beak? And what's going to happen now is this myosin cross bridge is going to be able to reach up. Watch this thing right here. It's going to be able to reach up. It's going to be able to attach. And then, using ATP, it's going to pull. Go ahead, pull. And it's going to pull on this actin molecule. It's going to pull it, you see? And more ATP is going to come in. It's going to cause it to release. And it's going to reach up and pull again. And what's happening is these myosin cross bridges are pulling on the actin. And as they pull it, it causes the muscle to shorten. So in other words, if this is actin, if this hand represents actin, oh, I want to get it on camera. If this hand represents actin and this hand represents myosin, the myosin is going to pull the actin so that the muscle shortens in length. Do y'all see what I'm saying? Let me back it up and show it to you again. So here comes the signal coming to the muscle cell. The signal goes down these transverse tubules. Calcium is released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Are y'all following here? The calcium binds to the troponin molecule. The tropomyosin, which is a rope-like molecule, then moves, exposing the myosin binding sites. Now this myosin cross bridge can reach up and, using ATP energy, can pull on the actin molecule and move it. Pull, pull. And then more ATP will come along that will cause it to release and pull again. And ATP is an energy molecule that just causes this pulling of the muscle filaments, and then they'll slide past one another. Then, after you're done contracting the muscle, the calcium ions come off and go back to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The calcium comes off. The troponin and tropomyosin molecules cover up the binding sites. We can no longer bind and pull, and the muscle will slide back. A relaxed muscle slides back to the resting position.
What are the binding sites called?
Myosin binding sites. So if we do this on a large basis, if this is going on in a lot of places, take a look at this video here. This kind of shows a summary of the whole thing. So in a muscle, this is happening in many spots. You can see the red is myosin and the blue is actin. And if many of these are doing it at once, and what they're showing here now what you just saw, they've turned it this way. They've turned it vertically. Before I was showing it horizontally, where this is the myosin, and that's the actin, and you can see the little cross bridges grabbing it. And if they all do it together, the whole muscle will shorten. Does that make sense? Thousands of these. In a muscle, this is happening in thousands of places at once. And the myosin cross bridges pull, and it shortens the entire muscle fiber. So a muscle is millions of those myosin and actin fibers pulling together because of the whole muscle to shorten. It's literally trillions and trillions of ATP molecules are needed. ATP, remember that energy molecule? To get those myosin cross bridges to pull, to shorten the whole muscle fiber. And the cool thing is, it all can happen like that. There, I pulled my muscle up. I did, literally, there was billions of those little cross bridges pulling to shorten my muscle. And then I pulled up. And then I reached back and I punched. And literally when I'm fighting, because I'm a street fighter, I'm activating thousands, there's 640 muscles in the body. And pretty much when I'm fighting, all of them are going at once. And I'm jabbing and I'm dodging, and my brain's sending all these signals to all these muscles, getting them to move in coordination to produce that perfect punch that lands and knocks that guy out. And I'm the champion, once again. Can you imagine all that activity? It takes a lot of ATP. Well, that's how I do it. Thank you.